The unannounced IndyCar show today on the 23rd of October. Those of you who have been reading the writings of Wee Ginger Doug today, sorry, my mouth is not getting its words out today, but if you've read Wee Ginger Doug's column today, you'll know that he talks at great length about Sir Kier Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, and the kind of things that he's been saying in his media interviews. Now, the thing that caught my attention particularly from Paul Kavanagh-Mawson's writing this morning was an interview which Sir Kier did recently, where he was asked whether he thought that what Israel was doing in Gaza was justified, and he said that he thought that the Israelis had the right to self-defence. Nothing particularly strikingly contentious about that particular set of words, but the interviewer went on to press him and said, well, he said, do you mean that it's okay for Israel to cut off the water and cut off the power to Gaza and the fuel supply? And Sir Kier repeated his earlier statement that he thought they had the right to do this. Now, later on, he went back on his word, said that's not what he meant at all. He didn't mean that they had the right to lay siege to Gaza at all. But it's kind of rather typical of Labour at the moment that they'll say one thing and then minutes later deny that they've ever said it. The other thing about Kier Starmer's Labour Party, which was very much in evidence from the recent by-election wins in the Deep South in Tory-held territory, is that the Labour Party itself is no longer recognisable for what it's supposed to be, which is a left-of-centre party. In other words, a party of the workers, which is essentially socialist in nature and left-leaning. No longer, under Sir Kier Starmer, it's very much an authoritarian group now, which doesn't even permit its own politicians to even talk or even express some kind of opinion on world events, including those in Gaza, the West Bank and in Israel. So nobody's really allowed to say anything about it. And this is largely for fear of what the media would do to Sir Kier Starmer, bearing in mind what the media did to his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, when the Labour Party was accused of anti-Semitism. And this was used by the British media to monster Jeremy Corbyn and basically chase him out of office, and it worked very successfully. So Sir Kier obviously doesn't want this happening to him, and so he's backtracked on one or two of the things he said, but at the same time basically espousing his support for Israel's right to self-defence. Now, nobody would argue that if your country is attacked that you should defend yourself, but it's very difficult to defend yourself against a terrorist organisation which has embedded itself in a densely populated city and is using basically its own citizens as a way of shielding itself, not to mention the hostages that they've taken. So it's not an easy political event to come to any kind of balanced determination on, because it is at the moment a terrible situation for everyone concerned, both Israelis and Palestinians as well. So I'm not going to address that situation, just merely pointing out Sir Kier Starmer's lack of consistency in his messaging in his interviews. However, the Labour Party has morphed into the Red Tory Party in England and is now positioning itself in the centre-right and is almost indistinguishable from the Tory party which is preceding it. Sunak is obviously hanging on till the bitter end, hoping that something will come along which might rescue his fortunes. You know, some major event might happen in which he can show some leadership and regenerate some, I guess, popularity within his own voting demographic. But at the moment, he is never going to give up and have a general election at the behest of the Labour Party, who are of course crying out for one at the moment. But Labour, as far as it goes, is a British party. It's a British nationalist party. It wraps itself in the Union flag. Starmer and all of his minions have said that there is no chance that Scotland will ever be given a Section 30 order. So regardless of who is in office after next year's general election, remember that Hamza Yousaf's plan for independence is basically to win a general election on a seat count. In other words, win a majority of seats and then use that as a mandate to demand negotiations with the English government. Now, the English government could be a Starmer government, And knowing that Starmer is not disposed to say yes to anything that Hamza Yusuf happens to want, I can't see that the winning of the general election might actually lead to a process by which we become independent. It might just simply lead to another standoff where the United Kingdom says, no, you're not having a referendum, you're not having your independence, and there won't be any process. There doesn't seem to be a plan for what happens after that. And sadly, the independence movement in general, including, and I'm taking everyone into account here, members of the SNP, members of ALPA, members of the Independence for Scotland Party, members of the Green Party, even the Socialists, all of the parties in Scotland which espouse independence as one of their aims, all of the members of these parties, and none, and people like myself who are independence campaigners without party affiliation, we're all at each other's throats at the moment. Nobody seems to trust anyone to do anything, and none of the groups talking to each other because of fears that people have infiltrated the ranks of the SNP, or that nobody has a clear vision for independence. And so that lack of trust has led to a fracturing of support. And the support for independence is still there, but the party support has broken down into tribal factionalism as usual, which is precisely what the United Kingdom would like to happen. And of course they feed that by basically, I suppose, highlighting these divisions. I noticed Glenn Campbell's assessment of the independence movement at the moment. He used the word fractured, and although I don't like Glenn Campbell and I disagree with his political viewpoint, he's accurate in that respect, that support has been fractured. But how do we get it back together again and re-establish trust? Well, I think we have to learn some lessons about being a little bit more philosophical. We have to realise, when you step back from the situation, instead of arguing with each other and reacting in a knee-jerk way in places like X, formerly known as Twitter, or on Facebook, with angry comments slandering the other party or decrying the other activists, that this is precisely what the United Kingdom wants us to be doing. And if we step back from that and we look at this as a, what shall we say, as a method of manipulating us, if we step back from that and stop feeding it and actually think, right, well, what would be the thing that would defeat the British interest here? It would be not just unity, but just simply talking to each other again in the way we used to do. In 2014, people used to talk back and forth between parties, between groups, across the movement. Nobody was at each other's throats. Yes, there were egos. Yes, there were people who were less popular. And so maybe, that there might be some minor arguments. Basically, we were all pulling in the same direction. We need to get that back. Now, finally today, because this is going to be a bit of a short episode, I just wanted to mention an article I read today in the press by a female academic from Oxford University, who was talking about the use of tidal energy to solve the UK's energy problems, energy needs in the future. And she claimed that British, in inverted commas, tidal energy had the capacity to solve the future energy needs of the whole United Kingdom. She never once mentioned that 90% of this tidal energy is found in the northeast of Scotland and between the west of Scotland and Northern Ireland. These two locations have the highest tidal streams of anywhere in the UK, and they're already developed by Scottish companies who have got some of the largest tidal energy turbines in existence already working on the seabed and floating in the ocean, generating power 4 times a day, regular as clockwork, regardless of the weather, regardless of the sun or the wind. So she's right in one respect, that there's ample energy there, but it doesn't belong to England. It doesn't belong to Britain. It belongs to the people of Scotland, whose energy it is, whose territory it is being drawn out of and exploited. So we are, again, hearing from Oxford University now that we're going to be further exploited, and now that they've just about drained the North Sea dry of oil, and they're going to go for the last drops of it, according to Sunak, they're now going after our renewables as well, and wanting to make sure that they secure them for Britain, or the United Kingdom, when in actual fact they don't belong to either. In fact, if Scotland were independent, we would be able to sell that energy to England at a price which was fair, and we could agree that. But sadly, we're not going to be allowed to do so. So I would say to everyone today, bearing in mind that the Labour Party is not going to be a solution to Scotland's problems, it's just going to be another Tory party ruling from London, that voting Labour in the next general election would be ridiculous. We still need to vote for the SNP. We still need to vote for independence. Because even if the SNP's plan fails, and I don't think it will work in the way it's intended, because there's no backup plan. But if we don't do that, then there's no chance of anything happening, and we do need a majority of pro-independence parliamentarians, both at Westminster and in Scotland at Holyrood. But what is needed is a plan B in the SNP's plan, and that plan B should include a complete repudiation of the union if they refuse to negotiate, non-cooperation with the union, the re-empowerment of Holyrood to hold a binary referendum of our own under the Claim of Right Act, and also under the international right to self-determination. And Salvo will be taking this to both the international court, but it will also be taking it to the International Court of Public Opinion as well. But aside from that, we need a mechanism. We need to say that if you will not give us a Section 30 order, we will simply organise a referendum and we will let the international courts decide on its legitimacy and not you. Because if the United Kingdom did actually say that they would give a referendum, then that would be for them to interfere in it. They would insist on being able to participate, and that actually is not legal under international law. Any country wanting to secede does so by itself without the interference of the larger state, because the larger state, as we saw back in 2014, can manipulate the results. They can mess with the polls. They can lose in inverted commas thousands of yes votes that were found dumped on the streets of our cities after the last referendum. All of these things would happen again. So we need a referendum, and that has to be the plan B. And we need to talk about how we can persuade the SNP to add this plan B to their existing plan, because that's the only element that's missing. And if we take the SNP plan at face value as a starting point, that plan B, to repudiate the union utterly under the terms of our own constitution and hold the referendum in defiance of the Supreme Court ruling, is exactly what any country seceding would do. And yet our politicians are not including it, but they should. And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about this amongst ourselves. And the SNP members themselves, I think, realise that there's something missing from this plan. There is no backup. And with the best will in the world, and I'm not saying this to decry the SNP, but this needs to be there, and it isn't at the moment. And for some reason, both Joanna Cherry and Tommy Shepherd have said that a referendum is not the way forward at the moment. So if a referendum is not the way forward at the moment, and we win the general election, we should have a referendum as a result of that. And that's what's missing, that link between what the plan is at the moment and what's likely to happen next year when we win another majority. So that's where we're at, but the stakes are just as high as they've always been. But I think we all need to start talking about that plan B, and we need to communicate that to the senior politicians in the SNP and make sure they put that in place, because we need it. Otherwise, we will be back to square one next year, back to asking for a Section 30 order, being refused, and then there's no plan. So let's have a plan B, please, and let's talk about it, and let's not criticise one another for making constructive criticisms of the SNP's plan. I'll be back again later in the week, and hopefully we'll have some more interesting news to tell you then. But for the time being, as usual, keep the faith, and let's stop bickering amongst ourselves. This is only serving the British state. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.